managing business continuity for strategic advantage. We clearly know that the conversations of COVID-19 is real. And so today what we're going to try and do is how do we, as business people and as individuals, make the best out of this. So we're getting people joined. So please stay. We're not going into the lessons yet. We'll give ourselves about 5 minutes. So please stay with us as we get more participants join. But thank you for joining. Raymond, I see you. I see Albert. And then Michael was on earlier. Abdullah is on. Thank you guys for joining. Okay, so welcome once again. So as I was saying earlier, thank you guys for joining today's section and today's webinar. My name is Samuel Yao Okyere, and our conversation basically will be we'll be discussing leveraging business continuity for strategic advantage. For everybody making the time to join us, we have about 10 participants now, and we're expecting about 70 people from the registration list. So we hope this will be a really good learning space. So once again, thank you guys for joining. Let's start the conversation as we have just about an hour. So as I said, the conversation for today is leveraging business continuity for strategic advantage. My name is Yao Okyere, and we'll be trying to okay, so guys, stay with us. Okay, so we're just having a bit of technical hitches. We're trying to share the slides so that we're all on the same page. Okay, I think we have okay, all right, great. So our learning pathway and what we're going to try and do today basically is try and understand the impact, do our own sort of impact assessment, try and understand what are the costs of the virus. Then we'll try and understand some basic frameworks for businesses, try and deconstruct business so that we can see how much impact does this have on us and how we can, okay, great. So we're back. So how this can actually help us rebuild up. So we'll do our first part of our section will be try and understand the impact of the COVID to all of our business and all of our lives. We'll try and deconstruct business and see how we can build it up. And we'll understand the basic risk management framework that is intended to build and protect business in normal times. And in times like this, how do we rearrange our enterprise risk framework to help us optimize the uncertainties we're faced with? And then the bigger question is, how then do we build resilience going into the future? And if we take a look at what the future holds, how can we build resilience going forward? For the purposes of this training, I'm sure you would like to know some of the skill sets of the person. So I have an actuarial science. I have a master's in risk and finance. I'm a lawyer and an ISO 27001 master, which is lead implementer and lead auditor. So let's just jump in straight to the discussions, and then I am sure we'll have a great time. So as I said yesterday, this is what the Johns Hopkins University told us about what this is. As I said yesterday, this is the status of the virus. All the bubbles you can see tells us basically about where we're having incidents, and you can see clearly America is in the lead. You can see spots over Europe. Asia, China is still, you can see the one province up there. You can see, basically the point is that you can see red bubbles almost all through the entire globe, which is to say that the virus is growing and is growing to an extent that we have evident or recorded cases almost across all the globe. This is 15:18 GMT yesterday, and the global infections, according to Worldometer, was about 2.5 million, 2587819, and the death toll globally was about 180,000. As at last month, the death rate was about 4%, but what it means is now we have a death toll globally of about 7%. The recovered cases are about 706. If you come to Ghana specific, as at the same time as at yesterday, we were told that the Ghana cases was about 1,154. Out of that, the total death in Ghana is about 9. If you look at the geographic distribution of the virus in Ghana, you see Greater Accra, you see Greater Kumasi, and the Ashanti region, and some areas as the map shows us. Now, one of the key foundations we're establishing for the purposes of the conversation is that please note that as at 22nd of March, the global infection rate was about 337,000. But as at yesterday, it was 2,587,819, right? The death toll as at March 22nd was 14,785, and that's globally. But as at yesterday, around 3 yesterday, the death toll globally was at 180,000. The key point being made is that if you understand the curves, this is a pure exponent, which basically means that the nature of the changing dynamics, the number of people being infected is actually exponential. In mathematics, they talked about linear progression and arithmetic progression and geometric progression and things like that. This is one clear case where incidents are jumping far more than you would expect. And so that means that it affects our business, and it's a concern because in 1 month, we've jumped from 337,000 globally to about 2 million. And death toll moved from 14,000 to 180,000. The big question is is Clemento Suarez anything close to by June there? Not the BCAC, you know. So the big question is what does it mean for us by June there? And how do we reconstruct and get better going forward? So let's establish again some baselines for these conversations. Now, the Minister of Finance in his address to Parliament says that the estimated cost, direct costs, including revenue losses, by the time the sun sets on this crisis in Ghana, at least in our initial estimations of what it is, direct costs in terms of revenue losses and things is estimated to be somewhere around 9.5 billion Ghana cedis. But the more important point is our projected GDP, which is about 6.6 to 6.8 or even 7, is projected in a worst case to be less than 2%. Now that's significant. That is extremely significant. That means that the activity ranges and the rate of activity growth in Ghana is likely to be less than 2%. And then the worst part is what is highlighted in red, which is the deficit. Ghana was enjoying a trade surplus of about 2.8 billion, but that is projected to be a deficit of about 5.8 billion after this crisis is over. Of course, each one of us know that this has affected our lives in no small way. So foreign direct investment is estimated to fall because businesses is not as booming as it. Supply chains will be distorted, projected food shortages, the hospitality industry, which includes the traveling and the hotels, occupancy is estimated to fall as less than 30%. And of course, the business and the contractual issues of people not being able to meet their contractual obligations. So the question is, out of this grim estimation and this grim direct impact we're seeing in these times, what exactly is the way forward? Does it present any hope for any of us? Which is the conversation? How can we then leverage this for the purposes of advantage? So now let us now try and reduce our businesses to the very minimum and try and find ways forward by reconstructing our business. So unless you're a monopoly, if you deconstruct every business, it looks like this is a standard chain you would find in a business. Usually you have strategic goals, right? So every business will be set up for a purpose. So whatever your purpose is, but ultimately you want to be able to win and have customer loyalty with a sense of delivering trust. Whatever it is that your strategic objective is, your ultimate goal is to be able to be somebody who you are trusted in that industry or that field. And to be able to get to that place of loyalty or that place of trust, we usually would go through a process of, well, people have to get to know the business. So we go through an awareness stage, and then we become considered when people need that product, whether in terms of budget or quality standards, and then people buy, which is the place of acquisition. And then in delivery of the service, there are two things. In normal expectations, we deliver, or when there are uncertainties, we have a risk management framework to mitigate some of the losses in those uncertain times. So we start the business with a certain strategy in mind. We want to achieve this. But the point being made is, whatever the ultimate goal, you want to be known as a trustworthy person in that business sphere. And in order to get there, we usually will break down all the activity chains or all the strategic goals into smaller elements or smaller channels. So typically awareness, you would say that somebody will take care of traditional media, somebody will take care of blogging content, somebody will take care of news releases, somebody will take care of social media, right? And so even in the awareness stage, every business that has a strategic view would break the awareness into activity ranges, and that would share between departments, specific people who are assigned to that specific activity in that broader strategic goal. Consideration to testimonials, partners, clients, signing, pitching, and those things. The point is, all the big things any organization intends to achieve, the ultimate goal is to be a trustworthy person, to be considered trustworthy in the delivery of that business channel. And in doing that, usually that objective or strategic objectives are broken down into specific activity ranges. And in breaking them down into specific activity ranges, we assign specific individuals and specific departments to take care of these activity ranges. And so typically we will say that coronavirus distorts the activity ranges or the chains of activities. And because people cannot move around because of the threat or the risk of the infection, the ranges of activity ordinarily performed as a chain in the awareness, consideration, acquisition, and service is distorted. So we say business is disrupted. So the question is, before we find our way up, we really need to understand this and say that whatever business I am in, can I deconstruct my entire objective into smaller units? Do I understand what is the ultimate goal? What is the ultimate objective? And can I reduce it down into, these are the chain, this is the cycle to achieve that ultimate goal. And in that chain, who is performing what function to help us ultimately get to that goal? And that is important, because then we can then analyze specifically and say that this activity ranges can be enabled this way, this activity range can be enabled this way, and say that this cycle may have been broken by movement, but we can do this cycle through another way. So this slide is fundamental to our conversation and our discussion today, to say that whatever the business you're in, whatever the activity range you're in, you need to be able to strip down your ultimate goal, which is what do you want to be trustworthy in? And you need to be able to say that all the circles of activity I provide, what are the specific activity ranges being provided and who provides that? And then once you deconstruct the whole cycle of business, the question is, how do you achieve that? So now I know, for example, let's say I'm a learning provider, right? And so I understand that I want to be trustworthy, or I want to be the customer of choice, the provider of choice when customers need a learning provider. Then the question is, what do I do? And we said awareness. We said that people have to consider you. We said that people have to acquire the service delivery and then a process of loyalty. But I do all of that by harnessing some resource, some strategic resource. And so ordinarily, people is the key one. So when you look at the left of the slide, you understand that one of the key resources every business harnesses is people. So people is a key resource. So whatever your strategic objective, you're doing it with people, right? And then you have processes, which is the down resource. So you're using people, and then people follow a certain process, right? And that process sometimes is enabled by a system, which is what we see on our right. And then people following a process and delivering through an enabled system are sometimes bounded by external events, right? And so the conversation is that, yes, I have a strategic objective, which is to achieve a certain end. That end is only enabled through people, processes, and systems, and have a certain boundary to what the external context offers us. So the question is, if any of these key resources goes wrong, it presents us with a risk, right? So for example, if people steal from us, we get for, which is what we can see in the at the left of the slide. If people make mistakes, we get errors, right? If processes are flawed, we get huge inefficiencies. If systems fail, we get failure. Disasters are produced by the system. But let us for today focus on the red bubble in the midst of all of this strategic alignment. So we're saying that the pandemic, right? And the risk of the pandemic truly is to say that the people are the key ones at risk, but because systems are ordinarily not affected, right? And so people are the major risk to this pandemic. But once people are not available to go through the process and the systems, almost everything goes wrong, right? And so we're saying that the pandemic offers a kind of risk that is not known, at least not in the scale as we know it now, for a long time. So the question is, how do we then manage these risks we're faced with, right? How do we deal with these risks we're faced with? Please note that we're going to manage these risks with the same resources that are necessary in building the enterprise, which is the people, the processes, the systems, and the external events, right? And so the question is, in the time when the pandemic as a risk has hit us, how then do we align our business in terms of our people, our processes, our systems to deal with this external risk or external source of risk that threatens our business? Up until now, what we've said is that the risk of the virus is real. We showed some global and Ghana specific data to tell us what the state of the virus was as at yesterday, right? And we moved on to say that irrespective of the virus, businesses have a strategic objective, and that objective ultimately is to become the partner of trust in the course of our business, right? And in doing that, in getting ultimately to a place of trust, there is a range of activities every business performs, usually in the scale of being awareness, in the phase of marketing and acquisition, in terms of pure service delivery, and then loyalty. But those broad headings are departmentalized into specific activity ranges. And so the virus as a risk hinders the flow of that circle and the flow of that chain, right? So that's what the second thing we've said. And now what we're saying is that in order to achieve those sequence of cycles, every business would employ people, processes, systems, and that is bounded by external events. And the distortion of any of these four resources of a business presents a risk, which is the bubbles we see in this slide, right? So now let's move on. So what we're saying is that in good times or in expected times, in normal sequence of a business, the enterprise risk management framework or the arrangement of a business to take care of all the uncertainties that faces it has a core goal, which is how do we avoid losses, right? So the business ultimately wants to meet its strategic objective and intends to meet it at less cost, right? Irrespective of all the uncertainties people, systems, and processes and the external context provides, the business intends to meet that strategic objectives with relatively no losses. But in normal sense, what business people do then is to say that what are the factors that are likely to drive a loss, and then how can we factor manage it? So, for example, if people will be fraudulent, what will likely make people fraudulent, right? And so maybe their pay check is low, maybe there is no segregation of duty, maybe lack of training, maybe lack of apathy and no care for the business. So then you build a certain set of activity to contain that likelihood. So you factor money. So you probably hire somebody in HR to provide training, to provide performance doing and somebody monitoring, right? And so that becomes in normal times. But also in normal times, businesses intend to be able to predict losses, right? And so businesses want to be able to know what is likely to happen. So maybe our process is going through person A, who does a report, sends it to person B, and the person B makes a decision on a client being acquired or otherwise, right? And so in that process, risk managers would ordinarily ask, what is likely to go wrong in that sequence? And then what is likely to be the loss events arising out of those sequences? And then business people will do what we call loss prevention strategy. Or if events happen, business people intend to understand what is the implied event, what are the ripples this sequence of events would bring, and how can we prevent losses from escalating? So we do loss reduction. But what we're talking about today is actually neither of the four. We're actually talking about continuity management, because at this time, we couldn't predict coronavirus. At least Bill Gates told us at the TED conference a while back, there were documents about pandemics, but no one really could tell this was coming, right? We couldn't avoid the losses, and the incidents of the losses probably are hitting us. So really, what we really need to be talking about is how do we ultimately finance and find a means of containing the firm-wide consequences of this virus. So that basically is the conversation for today, right? And so how does an organization really understand the firm-wide consequences of this virus, and how do we, as it were, risk finance as an option for business? So as we all know by now, the dilemma of the virus seems stark. It looks like you either choose blood or you choose money, right? So it looks like blood money is the option for these times. But truly, is that only the choice businesses are left with, right? Is the dilemma, we understand that there will be economic cost for the virus. And I've written a few articles on some of these economic consequences. And we know that if you expose your people, they are likely to be infected, because we know that the growth of the virus is exponential. So really, how then do we continue our business, or how then do we manage our businesses going forward, and not knowing the time scale for which this exponent will keep on? So the two things I want to highlight is, one, expectations and uncertainties, right? So the first thing is in normal times, right? We said that in normal times, businesses go through the cycles of employing people, processes, systems to achieve a certain goal, right? And so in normal times, what drives business is the objective. And please pay attention to this. In normal times, businesses are driven by the objective. And so we want to achieve A, B, C, D, and then we find the risk associated with those objectives. And then the course of mitigation is driven by the strategic direction. So strategy ordinarily drives risk management in normal times. But in very uncertain times as we are, what should drive strategy is a risk approach. And that is the incidence of the volatilities should drive strategy, not the objectives. And I think that is really important. So in normal times, we want to thrive. We want to meet an objective. But in uncertain times, we want to survive. And that's important. In normal times, we want to grow. But in uncertain times, we want to be able to conserve. And that distinction is important. So in normal times, as the result, we want to grow. But in times where our lives are at stake, the bigger conversation is that how does a business enable a structure such that it conserves business activity to the extent that it does not affect its survival, but it does not expose it to the growing risk as well. So that is the distinction. And as I said from the beginning of this webinar, the normal sequencing of a business is to create a place of trust, but we go through the cycle of business. People would have to become aware of you, have to consider you. They make a decision to acquire, they provide service, then you go towards loyalty. Now understand that with multiple customers, we say business is a going concern because this cycle goes on unending, right? And so now the question really is that in survival, which of the chain of activities should you hype, so to say, right? And so if I were closing deals by sitting in meetings, right? Does the fact that everybody is staying at home give me a better opportunity to increase our awareness activities through social media because I don't have to use them, right? And so is it a time to send a lot of emails to customers and to check on customers how they are doing, such that they see me as a socially responsible company so that they consider me, right? Such that, is it a time to ask, what is the impact of this? Or maybe this is a time to provide free webinars and conversation so that people know that you're aiding them through these hard times. So the point being made is that the sequences of your activity ranges are important. But in uncertain times, what should guide us is what are the risks, not exactly what are the objectives. So we're seeking to conserve and survive rather than thrive in these times, because it is only after we survive that we can grow after this one passes. So now let's understand continuity in its very essence, right? So how then do we as a business, how then do we conserve? How then do we make risk management the key focus, right? Again, note that the key things we're talking about is that in order to deliver your chain of activities, you employ people, systems, processes, and you're bounded by a context, which is the external event, regulation, and business context. And you provide a certain output, product, services, and the organization objective, which is the things at the top of the slide, right? So in the normal sequence, we're employing one of these four things to generate a certain output. Now, truly, how then do we then activate our business in such a way that these ranges of resources we employ to give the output is protected or conserved, but then the output is not harmed, right? Which is the ultimate question we're asking. How then do we conserve our people? How then do we make sure our people are preserved, our systems are not hampered, our processes are even fine-tuned and made more effective, and we're not breaching the context or the external things do not hamper. Yet we generate the product and the services that are necessary for the purposes of our business, right? There are 5 things I want to highlight, which are things at the bottom. And I'll start with the last on the right, which is prudence. So in order to generate a sustained output and a service and an organization, a business in these times would have to be prudent. You see, it is not like we have seen this virus before, right? And the nature of its exponent is not known. And so no one can ultimately tell you that there's a certain formula for which if you follow, you come up with a certain output, because this is new to almost all of us, right? So the key point is flexibility, which is built into prudence, right? Which is adaptability and memory. So the history book tells us pandemics we've seen. We know that the first one, recent time is probably the 1918. Beyond that, we've seen things. Even in Africa, we've seen Ebola not long ago. Ghana may not have seen it, but we've seen these things. So the big question organizations must learn is that what are the lessons of prudence these times offer, right? And how can we be most adaptable? Because adaptability is the key to navigating these times. Because if you say that, oh, for me, this is how my people must be. They must come to work between 7 and 10 p.m. And then they must do A, B, C, D to achieve 1, 2, 3 without recourse to a time. So you don't focus how flexible can you be in order to achieve this output, then there is a problem. So the conversation truly must be the fact that we really need to be adaptable, right? And that's one of the key lessons in times like this. So in enabling continuity, the first thing is that be specific to your organization. Don't let us sit here and say that do 1, 2, 3, but truly start with your objective, right? Know your people, your systems, your processes, and the context you're working in, and understand what you're generating, which is your output, right? And start from a place of prudence. Start from saying that, how adaptable can I be and yet achieve the goal whilst conserving the strategic resources in which I am using to produce my output, right? So prudence, which is made up of 2 things: memory of what these events in the past has presented, and how adaptable can we be in executing that. The second part is embedded process, right? Usually businesses will segregate processes. So the person in marketing is doing his own thing, and then the person in HR is doing his own thing, and the person in strategy is doing his own thing, and the person in risk management is doing his own thing. Processes are not embedded. Processes are segregated. So we all come to work, and our activity ranges is just to do our own activity ranges without recourse to what the next person does. But it's extremely critical in these times that everybody understands the chain. Everybody understands what the process is, the full cycle, such that the business enterprise understand that person A has one, and that one is becomes an input for person 2, and that input becomes the output the company is ultimately providing, right? And that process needs to be embedded to a point that everybody understands that, yes, we are becoming adaptable, or we are becoming agile for the purposes of this risk, but that cycle must not be broken, right? Because if I don't understand that my output is somebody's input, and I can't care about the whole sequence, I can't be bothered, right? Businesses must now enable everybody to understand the full cycles of the process, right? Such that everybody then understands that in the cycle, I am person 3 in the chain, being person 3 in the chain, output of person 4 and 5 depends on me. And so yes, we're being adaptable, but that adaptability does not in any way affect the output, right? But that having been said, yes, processes must be embedded, but yet we must have what we call modularity. And modularity is saying that we're embedded, but should person 1 not do his function, can we cross function? Can person 2 not doing his work can person 3 and person 1, can it be built such that when person 2 is not available, the whole cycle does not have to break? So can we then say that the activity ranges across? So person 1, the chain of activity includes but not limited to 1, 2, 3, such that anytime person 2 is impaired, person 2 takes a bit of the activity ranges of person 1 and then passes on to person 3, who does a bit of the activity range. So what we're saying is that, yes, the processes must be embedded, but then we should build modularity into the processes such that activity ranges are not impaired. People in the chain can do other things in the activity ranges that other people who are impaired cannot do. And of course, diversity, which is to say that in these times, I'm a risk person and I'll likely see everything from a risk lens. He's a marketing person and he will likely see everything from a marketing lens. He's an accountant and you would only see everything from an accounting lens. But this is the time to harness a broad conversation to build diversity, right? And so multiple channels of service needs to be considered. And so the conversation is, for the accountant, what really is the impact of this? And how do we become adaptable for the accountant, yet not impairing the chain, right? And then how then do we sequence the entire activity ranges without impairing the ultimate goal? Of course, that's ultimate purposes of prudence. But then to achieve that, we need to be able to have multiple sources of information and multiple channels of delivery. So for example, if our ultimate channel was face-to-face in branch, you had to go to the store. Now the question is, in diversity and multiplicity of channels, a distribution network where I've dispatch riders becomes an option. Is that really not a multiple channel? That leads me to the first one, which is redundancy. It is almost important to note that it will be difficult to execute this without building redundancy into the chain. And redundancy is that there should be multiple points of failure. What that basically means is that there has to be, you would have to, what we call, maybe you would have to enable multiple people to do the same work, right? And so if person A does 1, 2, 3, you would have to enable person B to also do 1, 2, 3, such that you would have to, for the whole activity range to fail or to collapse, almost everybody, all the redundancy or all the multiple points would have failed. So probably for a legal firm, maybe one person would draft the address. But now, because we're adaptable and we're working from home, maybe you assign 3 persons to do the same draft, right? Such that if one person is constrained because of things beyond him, you still have 2 other people assigned to the same project. Of course, that means a lot more increased service hours on. But in any case, if somebody is working from home, that additional requirement for redundancy is expected because, again, the key goal is flexibility, right? And so at this time, we all don't expect things to be the same. We all don't expect things to be as it was. So if I were doing 1, 2, 3, it will be irrational for me to expect 1, 2, 3 is all I need to do, right? And so we should all be open to multiple activity ranges, harnessing sources of information from multiple places and distribution channels from multiple places, building in modularity, embedding the whole process such that everybody understands the chain. But key and most important is the fact that we all need to be able to understand that adaptability and flexibility is about the most important continuity feature at this time, because no one truly knows what this offers us. So now let's say your typical organization, right? So you're here, you're going to enable all the things we're talking about, redundancy. You're going to enable multiple people to do multiple things. You're going to, such that you ensure modularity, such that everybody understands a bit of the chain, but in all, flexibility is directing us, right? The first thing is that before you're quick to jump into that framework, pause a minute and do what we call gap and impact analysis, right? So ask yourself really, really, in the service, which is the first slide shown right now, the overall risk, what is the overall risk in the disruption of my activities? And please note that we're still talking about the full cycles of change. So we understand the circle, right? But then understand what is the level of disruption. And if even you enable this continuity cycle we talked about, right? What would still be the level of disruption? So understand that. So first understand that. So you say that person A will do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 will be done by person 1 and 2, and then 1 and 2 understand the full chain and things like that. But there will still be a disruption. So do an overall assessment and understand the impact. If you enable flexibility, if you become flexible, what is still the risk you're holding? And the second thing, especially for a business, is to please understand your revenue and your cash flow trends, right? And so if I am enabling sales through a social media channel, what will be the impact on my revenue and cash flows? Because ultimately, that is what matters. So let's say at the end of December, I had a 4 million cedis cash flow. You need to be able to project and say that in this time, if I enable these channels and I enable other means of becoming adaptable, this is how it will affect my revenue and cash flows, right? So you know the overall risk of disrupted activities, you know your revenue and cash flow trends, but also note your employee status. So people in Kumasi, people in Accra, people in Tema, let's say people in South Africa if you're a multinational, right? Or any other company. So understand, maybe I have 5 people in Kumasi, 4 people in Accra. How then does this new flexibility I'm enabling, how does it help, right? In week 1, in week 2, in week 3, for how long I am going to do this? How then does it affect my employee status and morale and things like that? And ultimately, the big question will be what is really at risk, which is your value at risk. And we say value at risk is the worst possible loss anybody can take in a certain situation, given a certain number of days, right? And so assume that this virus and this wind stays around, as Clemento Suarez would say, by June year, right? So if we say by June year, the big question is what really would be your worst possible loss by June year? Really, right? So the big question is what really is at risk if I enable all the flexibility and I build in redundancy and I allow modularity and I embed the whole process? What really would be the amount at risk, right? And that the organization would have to make a conscious effort to underwrite that risk, which is why we call it a risk financing. Because at this point, the risk has indeed happened, right? So we need to be able to understand what losses are at stake and to be enable that worst point. But you should have a view of what that worst possible loss is, right? Such that if it lasts for 3 months, 6 months, 7 months, 1 year, you have a sense of what possible loss you are to take. But indeed, if by June there no be us and there and then so let's have a conversation about options, right? So, and I'm using option 1 to say that this is not the only option, but just to say that what are some of the options available to businesses in times like that. And so as you look at the ranges of your activity, so you look at the entire activity ranges and you look at what can be done in each of the circles of awareness, consideration, acquisition, service, and loyalty. You look at all the activity ranges. The obvious option in these times has become telework arrangement, which is working from home, right? So the conversation is really is that probably the easiest option that comes is which of the activity ranges can you enable people to work from home, right? And that should be the foremost consideration. But it doesn't mean it's the only option available, but that is option 1. So the business and the strategy team in your organization should have a conversation and should have a discussion around, okay, what other options are available to us in each of the activity ranges in the full cycle of our business, right? And so the typical option will be teleworking, right? Which is to say that can we enable some of the activities to be performed from home? Usually, in order to even make the decision of the option, you have to consider again the people, processes, systems, and external events, right? Because everything will come to the people, processes, systems, and external events. So ask yourself, what tools will be necessary? Is it Zoom or Skype? Is it SharePoint or is a Google Drive? Is it a note recorder or is a notepad? Is it a task assigner, or how do we monitor performance? Or is a time log? So you need to consider what tools would you enable help people work effectively from home. And the questions of, okay, so what happens to the compliance and the context and the demand of what the customers expect? So things like privacy. So if somebody is working from home, can he then share the legal file with his with his girlfriend, for example, right? So how do you enable privacy? How do you enable data sharing such that you still restrict the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of information? Then how do you make sure people conduct their work such that they don't misbehave? And then how do you enable client service and IT assistance? And then have a view of what cost this new arrangement will bring to the business. But as I said, this is only option one. You need to be adaptable and ask yourself, what are the ranges of my activities as a business? And then really ask yourself, what options are available to me? And that is specifically left to your business, right? And then once you select one option or multiple options, you're also expected to say that, okay, for person A in the activity range, so what we're saying is that once you select the option, enable a different process flow, right? So don't expect person A to go and work from home and still probably, if the team is not time dependent, still expecting to work from 7 to 10, right? If he can give the deliverables, maybe he's a nocturnal person. And in these times, all you need is that you need that report by 7 a.m. in the morning, right? And so set those timelines, and so that say that there is a conference call at 10. We are all having a meeting at 10 on Zoom or Skype, or you're sending your report by email at this time. We'll give you a telephone bill cost or internet cost. So basically reassess your process around the enabling and make a decision. We're actually wrapping up at this time, but I want to share a few things, and I think I'm left with just about 2 slides. It is absolutely, and I can't overemphasize enough, in this time, communication is absolutely critical, right? If not the most important thing a business needs at this now, communication is absolutely critical, right? Because in these times, don't forget all your stakeholders, all your people, all your clients, all your dependencies. They all need to hear from you because we're all uncertain. Everybody that does not know what is going on, right? And so communication needs to, if anything is hampered, and in this age of ours, communication will not be hampered by any of the things happening, right? So if this time does not give any business anything, it should give the business an opportunity to enable communication channels with its customers, with its employees, with its prospects, with its existing, with all the stakeholders relevant to the business. You should enable communication to engender the ultimate goal of the business, which is trust. Because ultimately a business needs to be known as trustworthy, right? And so in these times, these are the times you should enable the communication channels, right? But in doing that, the bigger question is who says or does what and when and whom is it intended for, right? But most importantly, in these times, we need to answer the questions of why. Because now we are reducing every activity ranges as flexibility will advise, right? Which is most important. So if my business, this is even a time to assess if a process is necessary, right? So if we were always doing this, it's time to ask ourselves, okay, why have we always been doing this, right? And who would be doing that going forward, right? What exactly will he do and when must he do it?
and who is the recipient of that. I would usually recommend that do a simple Excel, right? And in column 1, say who, column 2, say what, column 3, say when, column 4, say who, and column 5, say why, right? 5 simple columns. And so you come to activity 1, which is what? So the what would be client customer visit or client customer calls, activity 1. Who that does? Yeah, Sumpa. When does he do that? By close of day or by 5 p.m. To whom? He calls customer XYZ. Why? To enable the customer know that we can still do his business for him via our internet banking solution, right? And so do that for all the ranges of your activity, and it will be incredibly helpful to your business. Now let's take a quick peek at the future, right? My last but 2 article, which is on major of the news outlets, said something I want to emphasize. If you know a bit about me, you know I'm big on Africa, right? I think this is absolutely a big opportunity for African businessmen and entrepreneurs to realign and to take advantage, to strategize for the world after this, right? So there are a lot of bubbles, there are a lot of uncertainties happening, right? So there's a COVID-19 now. We are all trying to enable flexibility to do work. But the bigger thing I want to say is that we shouldn't enable it just to be bubbles in the air. We should constrain it to research and development. So these times should enable us to harness all the bubbles in aligning a certain, in building a certain line in what product, what development, what will happen after this happens, right? And every business is being forced. It's just like you play basketball or volleyball. When your coach calls a timeout, that timeout is extremely important because he's about to change strategy, right? And so take this as a God or nature given as a timeout, right? And so as your business, recall into a research and development mood and ask yourself all the big questions that regards your business now and your business in the future. And then when this is all over, you can come up with a new market, a new commercialization, a new business. Now, just give a view of what I think the future is likely to be, just to guide people. The first thing really is capacity building, right? And I'm sure that is where organizations like Innovare come in and become extremely relevant for the future, right? Human resource and capacity skill development, right? Education and capacity. In these times, we will have to unlearn most of the things we've learned through formal education because no one taught anybody COVID-19 in any school, right? And we still have to enable to do good work in COVID-19, right? And so that stark mindset, we will have to unlearn. And we have to teach people to unlearn, and we have to teach people to learn new skill sets that are relevant for the future. So as an organization, prioritize learning and prioritize capacity building because these times are not known, which means that we have to unlearn some things and relearn new things, right? The second one is, please think of as much as possible, how can you enable your business over the internet, right? Because if anybody is going to be a win, if any industry is going to win this COVID afterward, it's going to be the digital and the technology. Of course, other businesses would win too, but electronic digital business is becoming the new norm. And so if you haven't thought of ways to enable your range of activities over the internet, maybe this is the time to see how can I digitize my activity ranges, right? And for you as an employee, don't say that I will lose my job because we are digitizing. Ask yourself, what new skill sets can I acquire for the world that is becoming? And of course, I think Africa should take this as an opportunity to build a more integrated system, right? Both in economic policy, in supply chain and things like that. But basically the point is, if I were going to import things from China, let's say furniture from China, because of coronavirus, I cannot travel to China and see, but maybe I can travel to Ashaiman and see that carpenter deliver. So for the carpenter, This is time for a corporate to now enable a local supply chain and enable local production and manufacturing for the purposes of us. And of course, standardization and certification. It's time to reorganize our business and improve our businesses with knowledge driven from ourselves. But just before we end, please note that the nature of work may never remain the same again, right? If an activity ring truly can be done effectively from home, why must the person come to the workplace, for example, to incur utility costs, fuel, wear and tie to his car tie, and all the associated risks, right? If it can effectively, if it's more effective for somebody to work from home, the bigger question in this time will then be, after this, will the nature of work as we've known it since the Industrial Revolution be the same again? And that is a big question the organization should begin to think about. What will be the nature of work going forward? And then, of course, after 9/11, the world was faced with a new compliance scheme, a new compliance world. And I think after this, business continuity, for example, will be a big discussion. So the compliance and the legal framework will also likely change and will likely take a shape which will enable new practices and new areas of field. So let me end. I like to tell stories. So let me tell you a story to end today. There was a man called Scipio Africanus, right? He was a Roman general, and he was known to be very brute and conquer areas that was deemed almost impossible. So Scipio, there was a part of modern day Spain, the Spaniards. There was a place they called Numancia, and this is, let's say, between 145 BC and thereabout, right? Rome wanted to conquer Numancia, but Numancia was sitting on top of a mountain. And it was almost impossible for anybody to conquer Numancia because it was such a difficult job, right? It was so unpredictable, it was so difficult, it was almost impossible to do it. And so Scipio took the charge and said that, okay, you know what, I will go, and then, but the morale was low because people had failed several times, right? And so Scipio went and gathered people. He gathered about 40,000 mercenaries, people who ordinarily would not qualify for the Roman army. So he went and built his team of very low-level people who would ordinarily not be expected to overcome, right? And Scipio's strategy was twofold, right? One, to cut Numancia from surviving, to forbid it from all the sources of life. And so he's not going to attack because he knows if he attacks, he'll fail, right? And so he's just going to lie in wait, right? Till Numancia cannot do anything anymore. So if you see the picture, which I took from Alamy Stock, he built two walls. He built a siege. So he built the first wall over Numancia and built a second wall and built his camp within. There were rivers and water bodies going towards the place. He blocked all of that. He dammed all the water sources and nobody could come out. Basically, he starved Numancia from every other thing, right? The key point of the story is that after a long time, Numancia knew it couldn't fight the Roman Empire. It did not surrender. Well, it actually bent itself in independence. The point is that the virus may have placed siege on us, but it is not really time. Maybe we call it social distancing for the right reason. Maybe it's physical distancing. This is the time to reach out, because if the virus sieges you from all sorts of learning, all sorts of interactivity, all sorts of engaging on new knowledge, new spheres, new fields. So what I'm saying is that let the virus siege us, but find new sources of life, find new sources of fresh air, and do not surrender to it by sheer means of strength, right? Be adaptable, open up to the possibilities of this, right? If they had, they would have probably become Romans. But the flip side of the story is that we are also faced with an uphill task, right? And that's where we say an uphill task, a task that is on top of a mountain. Like we need to conquer the virus as though it's Numancia. We need to build a strategy that we lay in wait. One, so it has to be ambidextrous. One, we lay in wait and adapt for when it's over. But we also look to the future in planning as to what the future would be so that we can take advantage of what the future would be. So note that even in normal times, the Boston Consulting Group says that 1 in 3 companies fail in 5 years, right? So 1 in every 3 company fails in 5 years, whether it's acquired, it merges with somebody, it takes a different form, or it fails completely, right? But in these times, you can tell that this 1 in 3 would ultimately become far bigger, right? So the lessons we've shared so far is that insight and skill is absolutely critical because the nature of the virus and the growth of infection is exponential, right? So you need insight into the behavior of the virus, and you need new skill sets to enable your business channel. You need a certain risk approach. We said that in normal times, objective drives strategy, but in uncertain times, what drives strategy is survival, right? So enable a risk reasoning system. And then the third one will be diversity and renaissance. Have a view to take as multiple input and as multiple output as possible. So find outlets, explore social media, explore a new channel, a new website, explore a mobile app, explore multiple channels, right? And please note that rational misbehaviors would go for. And rational misbehavior is the wrong that is reasonable. So for example, if I would steal and I would be charged 100, if I steal 100 million and I would be fined 10 million, then it makes sense for me to steal 100 million because the fine will be 10 million. I get to keep the rest, right? And so what we need to ask ourselves as businesses is that what rational misbehaviors does this present, and how can we conduct our business such that we escape them? And the big one we're seeing now is, for example, phishing emails. So people are sending emails that are, because everybody is scared about coronavirus news, and we're clicking and people are phishing us. So we need to be aware of new risk or the new misbehaviors this new virus presents. And then we need to be able to design intelligent and resilient, which is the modularity, embedded process, flexibility, and redundancy we spoke about. Finally, it's important that we think like biological entities and adapt, because it was Darwin who says that the most enduring is the one that can adapt the most. Thank you for joining. We like usually to say that when we get to the bridge, we'll cross it. I guess this is the proverbial bridge we were always talking about. So we have gotten to the bridge. So the question is, maybe we'll cross, but the question is, will we all get to the other side the same, right? Maybe some will get to the other side. Maybe some will get to the other side in Lamborghinis. Others will get to the other side with Trotsky, right? So the question is, this is probably the proverbial bridge we would cross, but we all get to the other side the same. Please, we're enabled for questions. But thank you to Innovare. Questions, you can type your question and then in the chat box. So we have some questions here. So for example, Aaron says that, good afternoon, great section. Please, I hope the presentation will be shared. Yes, you can, yeah, it will be shared. Yes, so reach out to us and it will be shared. Albert says, good afternoon, Aaron. Yeah, okay, all right. Okay, so okay, so the presentation, okay, so great presentation. Thank you guys, thank you very much. Good delivery, thank you. As usual, someone, oh, okay, thank you very much, Stephen. So if there are any questions, please feel free to type it in and then we'll be free to share. But as I said, we represent a small movement called Africa Learn, which is to do nothing but to inspire learning among the new African youth. If you're on Instagram, our handle is Africa_Learn. It's a small movement. Just click a follow button. It's less than 0.2 megabytes. It won't kill your data. And then we have a YouTube channel, which is Africa Learn Limited. My name is Okyere on Facebook. That's my number. You can reach out. You can send an email, and we have a blog post. We share our thoughts. That's the blog post. But also, if you Google Yasumpa, there are a few articles out there you can learn. But Innovare, Are there any questions, please? Are there any questions, please? Okay, so we got one question. How do we get our employers to know and adapt to these changing times? That's an interesting thing. So the question really is that your employers, there's somebody who is responsible for business continuity in your organization, right? And so your employer, or there is a boss who hopefully is hearing this conversation or knows about business continuity. But assuming that employer does not know, it will probably be a time to go and speak with the person responsible for business continuity and say that, you know what, how do we enable these activity ranges a bit more flexibly, looking at the risk we are faced with. But then somebody, your employer should be aware and then should be acting in the best interest of the key resources, which is the people, processes, systems, or external event they are faced with. So employer should be the one leading this conversation, right? But in the absence of that, it will probably be in your best interest to raise the conversations at forums that are available to you through your employer. And I hope your employer listens. Yes, we also have another question. In an unexpected situation like this, how is an organization supposed to react with respect to all you have posited? Okay, so we're already in an unexpected situation. Yes, as we've said. The reaction, and I guess this, Kwame, your question is exactly what we've been trying to do with since the beginning of this webinar, which is to say that first, your entire sequence of your activity ranges, and then enable what is possible through the various options. So you would have to be flexible to your specific business, and then make a decision as to what is most what is at best in the interest of your people, your processes, your external events, for the purposes of your business, right? Richard says that post-COVID-19, employers may lay some employees off, not because they do not need them any longer, but simply because the employees may not have the skill set. I completely continue in the, yes, could you please throw more light on this? I think I tend to agree with you, Richard, that skill sets may change after this, because if most activity ranges are going to be enabled digitally, then employees who probably have no direct contribution to the new enabled flow of activity ranges may be hampered. So what I would say is that for you as an employer, usually the approach is to enable people who can learn new skills, right? And so allow new people to learn the new skills and train the people who are trainable for the new activity ranges and things like that, right? The questions of labor law, yes, there are obviously questions of labor law associated with these SACs, and I would recommend that you speak to your lawyer about this. There are definitely questions of termination and frustration of contracts, and these are right conversations. Amma says that during these times, how do you stay connected with your clients and customers? Amma, that would be, it depends on the customer, but enable, so some customers will probably say, you can Zoom me or you can Skype me, right? Some will say, text me, WhatsApp. Some will say, call me, right? So I would say that adapt a communication strategy to your customers, right? Know the specific customer, and even have a discussion with your customer and say that, you know, this has changed, but in your best interest, we will still want to stay close with you. So how can you best be reached? Would you prefer an email, or would you prefer we call you? Well, what is your best option? But if you're using an email, for example, understand that hacking and things are real, right? And so as a business, you may want to indemnify yourself. You may want the client to sign an indemnity form to say that this specific email, if I get any instruction from this email, I'll act on it in good faith. And then it will be binding as your valid instruction. All right. So Amma, that would be to you. Joy says that team members are not willing to share. How do you eliminate a single point of failure? That's a really good question, Joyce. So as they say, culture really is top down, but innovation is bottom up, right? And so if you have an innovative way of enabling multiple points of failure, right? Discuss it with your boss, but the real team culture will start with your leader, right? So whoever is a team lead should have the conversations about sharing and distributing the activity ranges among the various people. So yes, I completely agree that people may not want to share, but that culture can be changed by the leader. So the leader dictates the culture, but innovation is bottom up. So if you have an insightful means of sharing, please share with your leader, and hopefully he will guide the culture in the right way. Lionel says, how do you deal with an employer who insists on doing things the old way? Conservatism will adapt in one of two ways. It would either die or succumb late. Business people hear numbers, right? So your employer may not hear because it does not make business sense. So if you think it makes business sense, make a proposal, right? So do a document and say that this is my view. It does not mean your employer will take it, but it means that you have presented that option to the decision makers. So present that option available, and hopefully the employer takes it. Otherwise, like the storm this is, as I said, this is the probably the proverbial bridge. Definitely we'll cross it, Linus, but as to whether or not some will get by, Okada or Lamborghini would be left to your employer. So I wish you all the best, and I hope your employer really does what is in the best interest of you, the people, the processes, the systems, and the external boundaries. Okay, so we have another from Christina, which says, for sales teams whose core job is to go out and get new businesses, hampered. Any ideas for marketing engagement? Okay, so you would understand that in terms of delivery of marketing, for example, the chain, nobody just you don't just acquire a customer, right? The customer would have to get to know you. The customer would make a decision about you, then word referrals and things like that. I think this is even the golden opportunities to acquire new customers, right? If I am sure that Innovare, for example, in doing these free webinars and enabling us to share these conversations for free, at least it becomes a consideration for you if you need a training resource when times are back to normal, or even in these times, if you need consultancy and things like that. So what I would say to you, Christina, is see how best can you help your customers to live through these times, right? So in these times, as I said, surviving is the most important thing, right? So how can you be empathetic to your customers, and how can your customers really know that you're there for them, right? And that conversation of, we are here to make sure that your business is enabled in these hard times, becomes an opportunity for you to of course, offer the customer services and solutions that meet their need in these times and going forward. So you would have to re-engineer and look at your product offering and your service arrangement and offering again, and then repackage it in terms of offering lifelines and survival means to your customers in this times. And I hope it would help your business. Yes. Doesn't look like we have any other question. Any other question? Any other questions? Okay, so we're taking the last two questions. We have one from Kwame, who says that Kwame says that we have seen the volatile impact of the workers in the West and the Europe, for example, who are mainly paid per hour compared to Ghana, where we're paid. Well, some are paid per day and things like that. But I get you. My question is, should our salary systems and work contract change, and we adapt more telework? So what we will say is basically, please note that indeed, as I said, the working arrangement is likely, telework is likely to become a part of the normal going forward. When we find a new norm, telework, in my humble view, will become, because we've seen the biggest experiment on telework now, right? So we know impact on internet, we know output. So I think telework, and there are even people now who have a flexible working arrangement, right? So it would become a part. Now the question as to what the modalities of payment will become, again, that is a matter of contracting. So I am sure the employer and employees would have to negotiate, but I am not sure the terms should vary if the objectives remains the same. So if the deliverables remain the same for which it was priced I do not think that it should vary. But then I'm sure it would be subject to specific agreement and specific people. Abdullah says, has COVID-19 brought about a new industrial revolution? Maybe a more of an information revolution, maybe, and technology and digital age, maybe. So yes, there is some form of revolution going on. And for me, my biggest headache is I pray Africa sees and seizes that opportunity. But indeed, there is a digital revolution this can precipitate, and I completely agree with you. Kingsley says, great presentation. Thank you very much, Kingsley. Do you think a change in our way of working impact the risk appetite of our organization, and how do you think we should respond as staff who are responsible for risk treatment? Okay, so Kingsley, yes, every option will present its new risk, right? So yes, risks profiles will change depending on the options you choose, right? So once you're responsible for risk treatment, somebody must have done that.
That being convolutional neural networks, which is deep learning, you can add a layer, add some, add another layer, add extra computations before you finally compile.
So we know that before you risk treat, somebody must have done the risk assessment, right? And so even before the risk assessment, somebody must have done a risk identification. So what I'll say to you, Kingsley, is that yes, your activity range may be at the risk treatment side, but you have to take a risk assessment and treat what is available. But I'll say that now is the time to embed the whole process, and the identification of the options chosen and the assessment of the new options chosen, so that when it comes to you doing the risk treatment, you understand the new profiles assessment presents, and then the new profile of the bank. So yes, definitely, the option will change the profile. And as we know, profiles the decisions on profiles are made by the organization's risk appetite. So yes, some conversations on risk appetite, which is only a statement that proceeds from the board, would have to be made with the new change in arrangements. But that means that organizations would have to look at the enterprise risk architecture against based on the options they choose based on the risk assessment and the treatment. So Kingsley, that's a really good one. And thank you for bringing in that question. Samuel says that if your business relies on a third-party vendor, okay, who do not deliver and it's affecting your operation, how do you handle the situation? That's a really, Samuel, that's a really difficult question. And it is difficult because I'm sure your third party is bounded by contract. And so that arrangement is contractual, right? And the questions of whether or not he's not able to deliver because there is a frustration or there is a force majeure or there is an act of God is a question usually determined by the court. Is a question of law and fact, right? And so I cannot say exactly what you need to do, but I'll say that if you have any such case, please, you may contact your lawyer and have the conversations as to the specific contract and determine if indeed you have a case to proceed in terms of that specific third party. But that is a difficult question, and those are anticipated for lawyers' practice, and I'm sure those are business new litigation areas that might become rife after all of this is over. Frustration of contracts and invoking force majeure clauses. So thank you so much, Samuel, for that question. Okay, you go on to say if your business relies on, okay, so the same question. Yeah. Yes, so it depends on the contract terms. To what extent this is really excusable to say by the laws and the facts of the case. So thank you so much, Samuel. Yes. So again, we are ending here, and I want to thank the big boss himself, the the big boss Siki. He's a big man. So thank him and Innovare for thank all the team, Albert and Stella and Jacob and Michelle. Thanks to all the team for putting this together. And then we're really grateful for doing this. And thank you who tuned in. But now Innovare has a small word for us. And so I'll leave it to the host who will tell us a little, just about 5 minutes about themselves and their offering. As I said in the course, they have consultancy and training stuff, but I would leave it to them to tell you exactly who they are. So thank you so much for this.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We also like to say thank you to Samuel for the great presentation, and of course to you, our audience, for tuning in. As Samuel mentioned, we have a few offerings and a special offer for those of you who joined in today. So, that's slide.
That's one.
Okay. So Samuel is just going to show us a couple of slides, and then we'll show you what we are offering to our dear listeners this afternoon. Okay, so as he works on that, so basically, like someone mentioned, Innovare is a consulting and training firm, and we are specialized in a number of things, including consulting on enterprise risk implementation, audits and assessments. And we also do trainings. One of our trainings is the ISO 31000, which is lead risk manager. So these are some of the trainings that, in line with this presentation, we're offering to organizations, and they can take advantage of. But for this afternoon, we're doing a special offer for the participants who joined in. We're doing a free gap assessment and report on ISO 31000, which is on the lead risk manager for every participant here. So basically for your organization, we're offering a free gap assessment and report for you. Okay, so if you're interested, you can just go to the chat box and then you can leave your details there. You can just say, yes, I'm interested. And then we would contact you based on the details that you gave us during your registration. And then we can offer that free of charge for you. Okay, all right. I think someone has been able to upload that. So our offerings, which is the consulting on enterprise risk implementation, audits and assessments, and then our training on the ISO 31000, which is the lead risk manager. Okay, so as risk practitioners, this is a great offer for you. And our free offer for you this afternoon for joining in the webinar, like I mentioned, is a free gap assessment and report. So we're going to do a 1-hour desktop assessment. There'll be no evidence required. Our reports will also be based on the responses that you would provide. So please take advantage of this. Just say, yes, I'm interested, and then we'll get your details from the registration, and our consultants will attend to you. This is free of charge. You won't get that anywhere. Just to say thank you for joining us. Again, we appreciate all of you. We appreciate Samuel as well. And thank you and have a good afternoon. I think Samuel has the last word for you.
Okay, guys. So I am enabling the video just to be able to do this. As you may have seen, I'm an author of 2 books, and then I would like, if you've enjoyed this session, stay stay with us. So this is the first one, which is Faith of System Thinking. This is actually a book about the banking crisis that happened between 2017 and 2019. This is how do we build resilience into typical business models from a risk perspective. Like how do we all learn from this? This is only 50 CDs. You can reach out and we'll get a dispatch to bring it to you wherever you are. And this is a book about leadership. And this is a book about leadership. And this is a book that says that how can the new African be enabled to be a global world leader. And it's a book that we had input and we had a forward by Reverend Albert. And it's based on the lifestyle of Ghana's biggest playwright, Uncle Okyere. And you can read as for 100 CDs. And that would also be dispatched to you. So again, as I shared, thank you so much for joining us. And it's been a great section. Have a good afternoon and stay in touch. Let's do our learning together, and hopefully we'll come out of this better. And please don't forget the special offer that is only for today. Innovare's offer, they say, is only for today. So please reach out to them, and then thank you so much for staying in touch. We wish you a good afternoon. The offer, they say, is for after this webinar, you get a free ISO 31,000 GAP assessment and report for free. And then after that, they assess your maturity levels and then offer you a pathway to be fully risk compliant, like ISO 31,000 standard compliant. And then they will just tell you, they also have trainings and consultancy services, but they're offering a 1-hour desktop assessment for free, just to be able to get to know your business and tell you the way forward, what they can do for you and where you are in the maturity scale. They'll do that for you for free. And just state in the chat box if you want that, and then Innovare will contact you. And then wish you all the very best. Have a good afternoon.